The Saturn myth, Saturn's cosmos. The ancients preserved more than mythical historical accounts of Saturn's rule. From one section of the world to another, the planet god's worshippers drew pictures of the Saturnian configuration, and these pictures became the universal signs and symbols of antiquity. In the global lexicon of symbols, the three most common images are the enclosed sun, the circle inside of the circle, the sun cross, which is a cross, and the enclosed sun cross. It appears that every ancient race revered these signs as images of the preeminent cosmic power. In Mesopotamia and Egypt, the signs occur in the earliest period. Prehistoric pottery and rock carvings from Crete, China, Scandinavia, Africa, Russia, Polynesia, and the Americas suggest that numerous accounts, rites centered on these simple forms, which became the most venerated images in the first hieroglyphic alphabets. But what did these signs signify to the ancients? With scarcely a dissenting voice, scholars routinely tag them as solar symbols. They tell us that such renderings of the sun are perfectly natural, that is, they must be natural ways of representing the sun because one sees the signs everywhere. Though everyone seems to agree on the solar origins, many disagree as to what the signs depict. In the image of the circle inside the circle, does the outer band represent a perihelion, atmospherically caused halo around the sun, or does it stand for the circle of the sky? Some commentators suggest that the outer circle is itself the sun, leaving open the question of the meaning of the enclosed dot. Similarly, in evaluating the sign of the cross inside the circle, the experts cannot agree whether the four arms of the cross denote rays of the sun or 4/4 of the world. It is also said that the four arms depict spokes of an imagined sun wheel rolling across the sky each day. Is it necessary to point out that these differences of opinion immediately throw into question the common claim that the signs are natural solar emblems? So long as the meaning is uncertain, one can hardly state that a symbol is a natural expression of anything. Yet surely those experts who debate the significance of the sun symbols must wonder why the ancients, with one accord, inscribed the same images the world over. Consider the relatively complex sign of the cross inside the circle. The basic form occurs along with many variants on every continent. Whatever it may signify, it is more than a simple drawing of the sun. If it is a solar image, then one must assume not only that the sun worshippers around the world instinctively adopted the sun to a more complicated abstract form, but that every ancient sun cult drew upon the same abstraction. Why? The enclosed sun cross is not an abstraction. It simply records what the ancients originally saw. It is a literal drawing of the polar sun, passed down from earliest antiquity. The image of Saturn, the universal monarch, rarely do archaeologists seeking to interpret the widespread sun symbols consult ancient mythology. Yet the myths explain the symbols, and the symbols illuminate the myths. Largely overlooked by archaeologists are the hundreds upon hundreds of myths and liturgies focusing on the cosmic images, and ancient sources reveal a worldwide concern with a concrete celestial form, an ideal configuration, identified as the great God and his heavenly dwelling. The subject is not the present world order, but the former. The symbols, legends, and sacred hymns attempt to preserve a memory of Saturn and the primeval cosmos. The enclosed sun. When Saturn appeared alone in the cosmic waters, a brilliant band congealed around the god and his celestial island. This band was the original cosmos, often portrayed as a revolving egg, a coil of rope, a belt, or a shield enclosing the central sun. The sacred hymns and creation legends of ancient Egypt say that the Creator arose from the cosmic sea. A vast circle appeared around the god, forming the original place, the place of the primeval time, or the province of the beginning. The primeval dwelling was the island of Hetep, H-E-T-E-P, a steadfast revolving enclosure. Egyptian texts of all periods offer vivid images of this enclosure on the waters, called the Golden Pie-land, P-A-I, Pie-land, the Island of Fire, the Divine Emerging Primeval Island, or the island emerging in Nun, the cosmic waters. Diverse sources agree that the island of creation stood at the cosmic center and that it was the residence of the Creator himself, the central sun. Thus, while Osiris is the motionless heart in the island of fire, Atum, the stationary heart of heaven, is the sole one who is alone, who made his heart in the island of fire. In the following pages I shall attempt to show that Egyptian sources depict a band as something seen, the god's visible dwelling in heaven. Indeed, the Egyptians, and all other ancient races, were so preoccupied with the Saturnian band that they elaborated a vast symbolism presenting the same enclosure under wide-ranging mythical forms. Yet standard treatments of ancient myth and religion say little or nothing of the enclosure, and even less do writers on the subject seem aware that the pictograph of the enclosed sun, the dot inside the circle, is a straightforward portrait of Saturn and his legendary home. It is not for want of evidence that the experts have missed this connection. The only obstacle is the priori worldview of the researchers themselves, who presuppose that all references to the primordial light god can only signify the solar orb in connection with our sun today. The ancient language of the enclosure will either appear esoteric or meaningless. Of Ra, the coffin texts say, "We honor him in the sacred enclosure. Ra is the sender forth of light into his circle. I am the one who is in his circle." He announces. What could this terminology signify in relationship to the solar orb, since our sun possesses no perceptible relationship to an enclosure or circle? The translators will likely ignore the terms or contrive a complicated metaphysical concept to explain them. Through the Egyptian hieroglyph for Ra is the circle with the dot in the middle, and though this sign, taken literally, immediately illuminates the foregoing references, no one seems inclined to take the sign or the text literally. To the enclosure round the sun, the Egyptians gave the name Aten, a term familiar to every student of Egyptian religion. "Spacious is your seat within the Aten," reads the coffin text. One of Ra's titles is Am-Ateneth, the dweller in his Aten. Both Atum and Horus possess the same title. Similarly, the Book of the Dead invokes Osiris, "O great God who livest in thine divine Aten." Since the Egyptian pictograph of the Aten is the dot with the circle, or just the circle, it should be clear that the term refers to a circle enclosed housing the sun god. But from the beginning, Egyptologists have attempted to explain the Aten as the sun itself, translating the word as the solar disk, rather than clarify the Egyptian concept. Such a translation only confuses the sun god with his celestial dwelling. One Egyptologist, for example, states that the Aten was the sun, and that the sun was conceived as the window in heaven, through which the unknown God, Lord of the Disk, shed a portion of his radiance upon the world. Having identified the Aten with the solar orb, the writer concludes that the God who resides in the Aten is the invisible God. Budge voices a similar opinion when he calls the Aten the material body of the sun wherein dwelt the god Ra, as if Ra himself were an invisible power and the solar orb the visible emanation of the dwelling of the god. It is impossible to reconcile such metaphysical interpretations without the concrete imagery of the Aten in Egyptian texts. The Aten is indeed the visible window in heaven and the body of the sun. But this window or body is surely not the solar orb. It is, as the Aten sign, which is the dot with the circle, indicates a band housing the sun, and the primeval sun is Saturn. The same misunderstanding occurs in the case of the Egyptian term Ku and Kut. That's K-H-U and K-H-U-T, Kahut. The terms refer to the circle of glory, or the brilliant circle, conceived as a fixed place, the place where the primeval sun shines forth. Through the Egyptians regarded this circle as the visible emanation of the Creator. Standard translations render Ku as spirit or soul, implying an unseen power, and Kahut, K-H-U-T, as horizon, suggesting the place of the solar sunrise. Both translations violate the literal sense of the words. Literally, the Kahut, written with this sign, is the Mount of Glory. The circle of the Ku, or Kahut, was the glory, halo, nimbus, or aureole, of the Creator, what the Hebrews called the Shekinah, the encircling glory of God, and the Greeks, Stephanos, circle or crown of glory. Indeed, every figure of the Creator stands within the luminous ring, always considered as his own emanation. The band is not only the God's halo, his dwelling at the cosmic center. In diagrams of the cosmos, observes J.C. Surlett, the circle space is always reserved for the Creator, so that he appears as if surrounded by a circular or almond-shaped halo. If one accepts the immediate sense of the archaic terminology, the enclosure was no abstraction. It was Saturn's shining band. The Babylonian Anu, Saturn, was the high one of the enclosure of life, his dwelling, the brilliant enclosure. Here, too, the enclosure becomes the place of the primeval sunrise. The Maori of New Zealand know the planet Saturn as Perkaru, whose name conveys the meaning circlet, or surrounding band. From this name of Saturn, Stowell concluded that the natives could see the present Saturnian ring with the naked eye, something all astronomers know to be impossible today. When the African Dogon draw Saturn, they depict it as an orb within a circle, a fact which Robert Temple, in his book The Serious Mystery, cites as evidence for seemingly inexplicable Dogon astronomical knowledge, which he contends was introduced to the ancients by extraterrestrial visitors. But no one asks whether the order of the solar system may have changed, allowing for a once visible Saturnian band. The Lost Island. For the primeval enclosure, the Egyptians employed a variety of interrelated symbols. The circle of the Ku, or Aten, was nothing other than the island of fire, the province of beginning. A single spell of the coffin text thus identifies Ra as the noble one who is at the land of the island of fire, but also calls Ra the god who is in the Aten. The subject is not two different enclosures, but one enclosure under two different titles. And this identification of the central sun as the enclosed or encircled god appears to throw the light on endlessly repeated myth of the Lost Island, which the Greeks called Ogygia. Ogygia, one of the two. The island of Kronos, Saturn, in the farthest north, occurs under many different names the world over. The White Island, the Floating Island, the Revolving Island. May not these primeval dwellings simply echo the Saturnian enclosure? One recalls the words of Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Haste to the realms, rings of Saturn. Shape your course, where Catoil's famed island wandering floats on the broad surface of a sacred lake, the abyss. Not of our earth, the lost isle floated in the sea of heaven. Japanese legends recall the ancient cradle of life as Anagora, a floating island, the drifting land, which congealed on the waters. This was the Isle of Congealed Drop. Its location, states a native commentator, was originally the North Pole, which it eventually moved to its present position. Not of our earth, the lost isle floated in the sea of heaven. Japanese legends recall the ancient cradle of life as Anagora, a floating island, the drifting island, which congealed on the waters. This was the Isle of Congealed Drop. Its location, states a native commentator, was originally the North Pole, from which it eventually moved to its present position. O'Neill properly relates the Japanese isle to the floating island of Delos, raised from the sea by Poseidon. Another name for this island was Ortigia, which O'Neill connects with the Latin verto, Sanskrit vart, to churn. Answering to the same tradition are the floating islands of the Argonautica, called the Strophades, or the Isle of Churning. In the voyages of the Celtic divine hero Meldian, the adventurer encounters a fabulous isle in the midst of the sea. Around the island was a fiery rampart, and it was ever wont to churn around and about us. Examples are too numerous to receive elaborate treatment here. The primeval, revolving island of Rhodes, and the Corcyra, wheel, which gave its name to the Cyclades, the white island of Zeus, in the midst of the sea. The floating Hindu white island, Shweta Dwipa, at the polar center. The lost Toltec white island of Tula, in the center of the world. Without exception, the shining, floating, revolving islands are esteemed as the place where history began and seem to answer to the same archaic tradition as the Egyptian province of the beginning. The revolving enclosure around the central sun. It is possible that the ancients actually saw the mythical island, that the isle was not a geographical location, but a visible band enclosing Saturn. One must consider several closely related images, which also imply a visible band around the ancient sun planet. The egg. A hymn from the Egyptian coffin text reads, I was he who came into existence as a circle, he who was the dweller in his egg. I was the one who began everything, the dweller of the primeval waters. Here the reference is to Atum as the creator of the egg. But other traditions say of the great god Ptah, he had created the egg which proceeded from Nun, the cosmic waters. In the Book of the Dead, the light god shines as the mighty one within the egg. Homage to thee, O thou holy God, who dwellest in thine egg. As the stationary light god turns round about, his egg revolves around him. I am the God who keepeth opposition in the equipose, and his egg circleth around. O thou who circlest round within thine egg, Atum, as governor of the revolving egg, is the Lord of time, for time is regulated by the motion around the egg, Clarke tells us. Similar to the egg of Atum is the revolving sphere produced by the Orphic Kronos, time, who is Kronos, Saturn. The great Kronos fashioned in the divine. Ether, the fiery sea, a silver egg, and it removed without slackening in a vast circle. To his revolving egg compares that of the Society Islands, creator Taora, the ancestor of all the gods, who sat in his shell in an egg revolving in endless space. The same egg appears in Hindu myth, set in motion by the central sun, Prajapata. No, that's not true. Mircea Eliade finds recollections of the cosmic egg in Indonesia, Iran, Phoenicia, Lativa, Estonia, West Africa, Central America, and the west coast of South America as well. Certainly none of the later traditions improve upon the Egyptian texts which describe the egg as the enclosure round Atum Ra, but one can hardly fail to be impressed by the consistency of the tradition, and even the alchemists, much of whose teachings descended from Egypt, remember the connection of the egg with Saturn. They recall the egg as a fiery enclosure on the primordial sea, a circle within a sun point in the center, circle with the dot. This world egg is the ancient Saturn, they say. Is not this cosmic egg the band which the Egyptians called Aten? O thou who art thine egg, who shinest from thy Aten, reads the Book of the Dead. Just as the Egyptian god-king is the ruler of all that the Aten encircles, so also is he powerful in the egg, or ruling in the egg. In celebrating the primeval egg, the priest commemorated the island of beginnings. Budge summarizes the Egyptian tradition. The first act of creation began with the formation out of the primordial watery mass of an egg, wherefrom issued the light of the day, i.e. Ra. Concerning the identity of this egg and the island or province of the beginning, the text from the temple of Edfu removes all doubt. Another name, or the province of the beginning, was the island of the egg. Egyptian sources thus suggest this equation. Aten, enclosure of the central sun, cosmic egg, primeval island. The bond to reside within the Aten is to reside in the coil or in the cord. The hieroglyphics depict the Aten as a cosmic bond or knot, indicated by an enclosure of rope with the ends tied together. Shin, coil or bond, may be written with the determinative circle with the dot, the Aten sign. The bond signifies both a boundary distinguishing the unified domain of the universal monarch from the rest of space in order marked by ceaseless, stable revolution round the central sun. It is the bond of regularity, Shi's Mat, protecting the god-king from the surrounding waters of chaos. Interesting. Accordingly, the Egyptian king considered it as the incarnation of the universal monarch, takes up symbolic residence within the celestial cord, acquiring the great god's power as ruler of all that the Aten encircles. The priests indicate this power of the Shin coil, and in order to accommodate longer names, they eventually expanded the coil to an ovoid form, which yielded the familiar royal cartouche, in which the names of all later kings were inscribed. Of this cosmic bond or knot, the hieroglyphics offer many signs. Among them are these symbols, but each possess the same root meaning as a protective boundary defining the original dwelling of the Creator in heaven. The symbols convey the sense to circumscribe, to set the bounds. The Creator, as the measurer, prescribes the limits and measures out the sacred enclosure by stretching the cord round about, produced a unified dwelling, the primeval island, protected from the evils of chaos and darkness. But the ancient mythmakers conceived Saturn's enclosure as a cord binding together the god's dwelling. Will explain why the Babylonian Ninurta, Saturn, holds the Markasu, or bond of the cosmos. Langdon writes, the word Markasu, band, or rope, is employed in Babylonian philosophy for the cosmic principle which unites all things, and is used also in the sense of support, the divine power and law which hold the universe together. The Orphic poet thus celebrates Saturn, Kronos, as the father of the blessed gods, as well as of a man. You who hold the indestructible bond. It is easy for contemporary writers to speak of Saturn's bond as an invisible principle holding the universe together. But in the original symbolism, one sees the bond as the shining boundary of Saturn's dwelling, the true cosmos. It was not in Egypt alone that the cord signified the edge or border. What the Greeks called, here's another one, pureta, rope or bond, possesses the additional meaning boundary. The Latin ora, cord, means also edge. A similar meaning attaches to the noose of the Hindu Varuna or Yarna. The bond delimited and protected the sacred space occupied by the universal monarch, and its connection with the sign, circle with the dot, links it directly with Saturn's island egg. The garment, myth-making imagination also appears to have conceived the Saturnian band as God's girdle, collar, or belt. I am the girdle of the garment of new, shedding light, states a hymn from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The great God is the girdled and mighty one, coming forth triumphantly. A common hieroglyphic determinative of the girdle or collar is the cord sign. The shield all creation legends involve a struggle between the light god and the destructive powers of the abyss, chaos. The mythic enclosure provides the god's defense against the turbulent waters which originally prevailed. The Egyptian enclosure, states Raymond, had the function of protecting the sacred area from the evil coming from outside. Aten was one of the numerous Egyptian names for this defensive rampart in heaven. The Aten makes thy protection, states the litany of Ra. The cosmic egg serves as the same fortress.
I am Horus, whose protection was mated within the egg. The fiery blast of your mouths, the fiery water of chaos, does not attack me.
The band of Aten, circle with the dot, as the protective boundary, was the great god's shield, defending off what the texts call the fiends of disorder. It is this mythic history of the band which explains why the hieroglyphics, the shield sign, signified sacred space in general. All who reside within the shield's enclosure occupied the safe and stable ground, cord belt, and shield coverage. The Great Father wears the cord as a girdle. It protects him as a shield, not merely in Egyptian symbolism, but in the international language of symbols. Why, for example, did divine figures from Babylonia to Greece to Mexico wear a sacred belt of rope? And why was the belt conceived as an impenetrable defense? Mexican illustrations of the divine shield show it to be nothing more than a circle of rope. It was certainly not practical experience which suggested the magical powers of a shield so conceived, but the mythical imagery of the enclosed sun is quite sufficient to explain such anomalies. The great god's shield and the celestial cord signified one and the same protective enclosure. If the ancients actually saw a band around Saturn, it is clear that the enclosure fostered diverse but interrelated mythical interpretations. A literal reading of Egyptian and other texts will confirm an extraordinary equation. Enclosure of the central sun equals, circle with the dot, primeval island, cosmic egg, cord, girdle, belt, collar, or shield. Concerning the overlapping images, much more needs to be said. The signs and the myths become comprehensible only when one relates them to the heavens of ancient times. Celestial shining, celestial island, egg, cord, girdle, and shield mean nothing more than a shining revolving enclosure around the great god. Was this band real or imagery? The equation can be answered by exploring certain other aspects of the enclosure. End of subchapter. The cosmos and the divine assembly. The sign of the enclosed sun, the circle with the dot, portrays a circle of secondary lights revolving about the stationary god and forming Saturn's cosmos. The mystic traditions farther present an apparent paradox. Obviously, he is the God One, the solitary God in the cosmic sea. Yet, he is the All, embracing a company of lesser gods. This is not a contradiction. In the first phase of creation, the god brought forth a circle of secondary lights. These issued directly from the god to become his visible limbs. It is the fundamental character of the God One, the Heaven Man, to unite in a single body all the secondary powers of the cosmos. In Pythagorean Napoleonist and Gnostic systems. The primal figure is the One, the All, whose symbol is the enclosed sun, circle the dot. Hindu mysticism offers the latter sign as an image of the primordial unity, and the same interpretation is repeated by the alchemists. Today one naturally thinks of the All as boundless space. The terms which translators render as cosmos, heaven, firmament, sky, or universe suggest to the modern mind a limitless arena of the sun, moon, planets, and constellations. But the original meaning of the All is bounded space, a place, the place, or place par excellence. The cosmos simply means the province of the God One, who as Lord of the All governs the province and is the whole of its parts. Having overlooked this restricted sense of the terminology that translators replace concrete meanings with ambiguity in the guise of modern-sounding metaphysics, the once visible dwelling of the central sun thus becomes, in all translations, all existence. Almost without exception, the translators failed to notice, 1, that the creator was Saturn, recalled as the central sun, and 2, that the sign of the central sun and the sun of the All were the same image, circle with the dot. The true cosmos was Saturn's enclosure. And nothing else is necessary in order for one to understand the ancient characterization of Saturn as the heaven man, whose body encompassed the cosmos. When Hildegard Louis reports that the Sumero-Babylonian priests of Saturn regarded the planet god as the embodiment of the whole universe, the modern mind boggles. Could the ancients have been so frivolous as to identify Saturn, the present barely discernible point of light, with the whole universe? The answer is that Saturn was not a mere speck of light, but a gigantic globe at the polar center, and the universe did not mean the open heavens, but Saturn's dwelling, the Anki, or band of the cosmos. Saturn's towering form filled the Anki. Zoroastrian texts describe the original cosmos as the body of Zervan, time, Saturn, a revolving wheel called the Spiller, the Spir, S-P-I-H-R, which remained ever in the same position. The fall of the stationary wheel coincided with the collapse of the primordial era. The imagery suggests not unlimited space, but the tangible configuration of the enclosed sun. Accordingly, the latter mystic traditions, as reviewed by Jung, describe the image, circle with a dot, as the cosmic form of Adam, the anthropos, the original man, or man on high, identified as Saturn. Always the body of this primal man means cosmos. The interrelated myths and symbols of Saturn's cosmos receive remarkable clarification in the creation accounts and the liturgies of ancient Egypt. Though I briefly touched on the Egyptian texts in earlier discussions of the heaven man, amplification is necessary. End of subchapter.